whole of council Monday, September 9th to order. There's an agenda in front of you which has a single item on it. Can I have a motion, please, to adopt the agenda? Councillors Adie and Randhawa. Any additions or deletions to the agenda? All in favor? Any opposed? It is carried. I note that we have Councillor Forster joining us by Zoom or whatever device or program she's using to join us this morning remotely, or this afternoon, sorry. So there are no presentations. We have a report from the Chief Financial Officer with regards to financial stability and resiliency policy. Dr. Buchan, is there anything you wanted to do to introduce this?
No, Your Worship. I'll pass it right over to Director Bombin to speak to her report.
Director Bombin.
Thank you. Okay, so the intention of the policy is to basically protect the city from future shocks like the one that we experienced with the pulp mill going down a long time ago, which we are obviously living through the unintended consequences of some of the slashing that had to occur at that particular period of time, but also to embed the fact that the municipalities' costs do increase. We're pegging it at about a 2% to be the amount that would actually cover off contractual wage increases, that sort of thing, WorkSafe. So RCMP, for instance, those costs have been going up as well. But we've also tried to recognize that there should be an allocation that we're putting in for asset management. So just to basically go over it in brief, so the city does have 4 funds: the tax-funded general fund and 3 self-funded utility funds, which are funded through utility fees. User fees, basically, is how the self-funded function works. So as mentioned, the 2% increase to the mill rate and to the utility funds baseline budgets annually will contribute towards predictability for all of the taxpayers. It also has some predictability for staff as far as what the council's approved kind of increase that you would like to see potentially at the worst case. There is going to be non-market change, of course, that happens in this community from the perspective of growth, houses that are being built, businesses that are being built, and the new money that comes from those new builds will actually go against this potential 2% minimum increase. So, for example, if the 2% increase is, say, $200,000, which it isn't, and there was some new taxes from new builds of, say, $50,000, then that would just mean that the actual only increase that we would need to balance the budget would be raising $150,000, which would be, in this example, 1.5%. So basically, the taxation function from new builds for our minimum budget, from everything except for major industrial properties, is considered as being a part of this minimum 2%. The major industrial taxation economic growth, so the taxes that come from new builds on major industrial properties, which would be for things like the propane terminal on Ridley Island, that sort of thing. That new money we're proposing will actually go directly into capital reserves, which can get used across the funds that I've just mentioned, the general fund and the utility funds. So major industrial properties typically do not pay into the utility funds because they're not connected, which means that any new construction and renewal that has to happen for this city that relates to water, sewer, solid waste, well, generally water and sewer because of the connection issue, has to actually be paid by the users, which are predominantly just small business and residents. And we can all tell, based on the big project, that the cost of infrastructure rebuilds is exorbitant. We are about to do a $200 million project, and we needed grant funds for that. Not to say that we won't apply for grant funds in the future. However, these are large costs, and we can't pass these on to residents and to small business because it would increase the fees significantly. So new money coming in from major industrial growth, if it's put into capital reserves, it can get allocated across all of the funds. It doesn't have to go just towards the general operating. So that is the benefit of doing this particular exercise and what's in this policy. As an example, the propane terminal that was built on Ridley Island, that was new money that came to the city in form of taxation. Council at the time in 2019 and 2020 allocated a portion of the taxes towards the RCMP building, which was a capital build. And it was to fund basically the debt payments that we are going to be undertaking for that particular build. Because council did that, even at the interest rates that are proposed for that debenture debt that we will probably be taking out next year, considering the project is almost done, it looks that we will not have to raise taxes at all for all the property owners in Prince Rupert for that particular capital build. So, and that is an example of non-market change from major industrial growth in action. Otherwise, if we did not have that at this particular time next year, we would possibly be proposing a 5.5% tax increase for the RCMP building. But because council made the decision to allocate the money that would be used to service the debt, there won't be a tax increase that we expect based on the interest rates.
Attached to the build.
Attached to the build, yes.
Yep.
Attached to the build. Is there any other questions? That's essentially what it is. It also talks about when we do our bylaw, how we made the change for the budget process to be in this part of the year so that we can give the staff direction on when to go ahead and proceed under the bylaw as it's presented prior to the actual numbers coming in from BC Assessment and all the final iterations of that process, which must be legislatively done by the middle of May anyway. But at least this way it starts staff with an understanding of what they can proceed to order, that sort of thing, for capital projects and special projects and just general operations overall.
Great. Councillor Cunningham.
Okay, one question, or that is, if the caps are removed from the port, or the grant that comes from the province to make us whole for the caps were to be increased at any time, where you use that example of the 50,000 coming off the 200,000, would that still apply to that also?
Director Bombin.
That's actually a good question. This policy doesn't anticipate presently that the province is going to be making those types of changes. So I would say that at that point, we would probably take another look at the policy and bring it forward.
Councillor Randhawa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thank you for your presentation. So, so new industry, this applies to new industry and new housing too, right? And so let's say BOPAC start next one, right? So there was 500,000. So 500,000 of the tax will go to 2% goes to this fund, or how that works?
Director Bauman.
Through the mayor, any taxes that would come from the VOPAC build, for instance, would go into capital reserves just directly. It would not contribute towards the general operating fund.
So let me restate this really quickly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. what in essence we're saying is that council will count, people can count on a minimum to, I think, 2.5% tax increase every year. That just get used to it, because costs go up every year, and if we're going to keep doing the same things, that's one chunk of it. That money would be paid from anything within the business, commercial, residential piece, right? So new build in there would mean that the average homeowner's taxes wouldn't go up 2.5%. They could narrow that down. Anything that happens on the major industrial side has nothing to do with that, but would be going into special funds, so that we don't get too dependent on that money, but that we can use that to throttle up or throttle down in our spending if we needed to. Dr. Buchan, you want to say something? And I do see Councillor Forrester's hand as well.
Yeah,
Mr. Mayor, I was just going to reiterate what you were saying, and you summed up exactly what I was going to just check my assumption on. So
Okay, thank
I
you.
put my hand down.
Okay, thanks. Dr. Buchan.
And just in terms of context of where we're at right now, with some $500 million more dollars of infrastructure that we need to do, the major industry increases in major industry will go into that fund. It's already got a number of homes that has to be spent on. So I think that for the next many years that money needs to go to infrastructure.
Right. Councillor Randhawa.
So the new money has nothing to do with the legacy fund now, or
Correct.
only goes to this one?
Sorry, new money coming from industrial taxation would be separated out from that. So what I hear staff saying is let's talk about what it takes to run the city without doing big capital projects, and let's understand that we need to have a secure base for that, and that would be residential, commercial, business, those areas. Count on that going up 2%, 2.5% a year. Let's just accept that that's going to be a reality. Any of these new big projects, whatever they might be, but Vopak is a fabulous example, we'll take that money and do, I want to say it's much similar to the philosophy that we've had with Watson Island, really, where we're not using that for operational spending. It's for capital. Only in this case, these would be going into funds, and the funds could be used wherever, right? Go ahead.
So our legacy fund will be not getting any extra money now. That will be cap over there. Now, so we have different fund now. So new industry will throw all the money there. So how that separate now, legacy fund and
Director Bauman, do you want to take a crack at that?
If I understand correctly, any new major industrial builds, whether it's on Watson Island or if it's on port lands or any other lands that are classified and the property is zoned for class 4, which is major industry, and there is a build that is major industrial, that is just taxes that will come to the city. Watson Island specifically is just a little bit different from the perspective that Legacy is also the the tenant of the city, and it is a separate business, and it charges rent for properties on Watson Island. So if it's a light industrial build that happens on Watson Island, it will not be money that goes into the class 4 allocated capital reserves. Light industrial would just come into the general fund like any new builds for any other properties in Prince Rupert.
And I think it needs to be emphasized, I mean, this is a policy. So it's a direction, it's a guideline for staff, it's a guideline for residents. So, basically we're saying, here's what you can count on happening in the future. Should circumstances arise, council's always free to change its policy or change its mind. Go ahead, Dr. Buchan.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just for clarity, Councillor Randhawa asked about legacy. All the funds from legacy, those are not taxation dollars. Those are
Right.
This policy does not speak to legacy dollars
Yeah,
whatsoever. It does speak to the tax dollars raised off of Watsa Island.
Right. Exactly. Councillor Adey.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. I think I'm still in the getting to know you phase of thinking about this. So just a little bit of history. When I first came on to council 6 years ago, we had a run of 0% increases. Councillor Skelton Morvan has the same timing as I do. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, was it 2021 or 2022 when that changed through the mayor? I think we went to something in around 10%, and then another one the year later around 7 or 8. So if I take that 16% increase and divide it by 6 years, you end up somewhere in the realm of 2.5%. So this, I guess, part of the logic of this is that it seeks to make that a little more gentle and predictable. So I understand that, and I'm happy to have my thinking corrected on that score by
No, I think that's quite
anybody
accurate.
who sees that differently. But I also want to ask a little bit about process, because the process of doing budgets and determining tax increases has been cyclical on an annual basis. And embedded in that process has been sort of rolling out the proposal, providing a period of time for public input. It's more exciting some years than others. And then a final determination is reached based on consideration of what the budgetary realities and requirements are, as well as that public feedback in terms of how to massage what we're doing on an annual basis. So what we're proposing to do here, I think, is to change that game a little bit. Now, I do understand that it's a policy, as you said, and we will still go through an annual budget process. My concern would be that if we're baking in the 2% or 2.5%, that it becomes very, very much more difficult to undo if we wanted to. And I can imagine circumstances where we might want to. We lived with 4 years of zeros because that seemed like a good idea at the time. It may seem like a good idea again. So I'm concerned a little bit about making a decision here, which if it goes the way it might go, based on the discussion we have in the community of the whole, having that business brought to a regular meeting the same night, done. That doesn't look a lot to me like an inclusive conversation with our constituents about a change, which I in principle I agree with, for the reason that I've outlined with the changes in increases over the last 6 years. I agree with it, but at the same time, it feels to me like we're leaving somebody out in reaching that conclusion. I'm not sure what to do about that, but that's kind of where I'm landing at the moment.
Dr. Buchan.
Your Worship, a few thoughts on that. The 0%, multiple years of 0%, actually means a reduction, unless we're in a deflationary period in costs. In money for the municipality to do its work, and we end up cutting service and deferring maintenance and all sorts of things that create a problem later. Soyuz experiences after many years of below zero budgeting, basically, or zero budgeting, and they had a equivalent of some 35% increase in 1 year because of that. So this policy, I think, says off the top of it, multiple years of zero is not a good idea, and council does not recommend it. But it doesn't bind council's hand. And in terms of process, I don't think this materially does much to the process. The process stays the same. This is council's guidance to staff on how to prepare a budget, and it's advice to itself on how to consider it. But council is always in the position of saying, this is good advice, but right now we're facing these practical realities, and council is free, utterly free, without any bylaw change, to do something different. It's guidance and advice. We will still have to prepare the budget in accordance with this and bring it to you as we are now. And council will go through the public process, and council will make its decisions.
Councillor Cunningham.
Basically, we can override at any time. And this is just a buffer or a safety thing. The general consensus after zero increases or 1% was it was a mistake. And the councils at the time realized it after the fact. Because if we'd gone at 2.5% increase in those years, we wouldn't have had the big jumps later on. And we all came to that realization after. No one likes a big increase, but they look at a smaller increases. Oh, I can handle that sort of thing. No one wants taxes, period. But a couple of questions. With the taxes on Watson Island, if a new major industry comes in, does that mean that'll be going in the capital reserves and not general taxes?
I would think that's what the policy says. Director Bombin.
Yes, that's exactly it. Anything that is assessed in a major industrial class would go into capital reserves. If there's any businesses that do go on Watson Island, they will be a tenant of Legacy, in which case the rent money can flow through as a dividend to the city as in the manner that it has been already.
Yeah, I realize that. I like the report. I like the idea of that, and at any time we can override the 2.5% if we want. And there's going to be years when we might say, no, we're not going to put anything into reserve because we've got too big of a jumper. We need it someplace else, I think. And I think it's going to be up to councils at the time to decide, as we're not passing this as a bylaw or anything. It's just a policy, correct, I believe.
Correct.
And so it's just, like you say, a direction. But one thing, you say major industries don't pay utilities. I know on Watson and Ridley that the water doesn't come from Prince Rupert, it comes, correct, from Port Ed. But DP World and places like that, do they pay utilities?
Director Bauman, I don't believe they do, but Director Bauman.
It's just minimal for DP World, right, for water. And then they don't pay into sewer because they have their own treatment plant, I believe. Isn't that correct, Director? Yeah.
So when you say minimal, are they on a meter or anything like that?
I'm getting a nodding head. Yes, Director Bauman, go ahead.
Yes, all commercial is metered. Anyone that's new to they're all metered.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for the
Any
report.
other questions or comments? Councillor Skelton Morvan.
I apologize for arriving late to the party. I was actually crushed between a larger motorcycle and trying to move it to get my motorcycle out. So spent a good 10 minutes underneath the bike. Came out with a limp, no crushed leg, so that's good. But I guess relating to the particular financial plan, so looking at the stability and resiliency aspects, like we didn't have those aspects ahead of time because there just wasn't the money to pull from during the dark days of the fall of the mill and things like that. So any way we can mitigate this, I'm obviously in favor of. Looking forward into the life cycles of future operations and things like that, where many have a 30 to 50 year life cycle. Having said that, 30, 50 years down the road, when those come to an end, who's to say what our industry is at that point? So we definitely want to have a stable line for the cost of doing business, and then also mitigate some of those future risks, as well as put aside some funds for future investment, because right now I imagine the quiet recession that we're experiencing has become a little louder in the grocery stores and things like that, and we're seeing the price and cost of doing business going up. So with that pattern and seeing that trajectory, I think 2.5% with that flexible notion, I think is definitely something that we would seize the benefit of being able to actually implement that on a policy level, so that we can prepare budgets going year to year. So that's my 2 cents, and just a great job to Director Bombin and the financial department for putting this together.
Thank you. All right, if there's no further discussion, I guess we haven't had a motion, have we? And we're not making a decision here, but we make a motion to move it to the regular council meeting.
Your worship, the committee would make a recommendation.
Correct.
Council then considers the recommendation.
Right. So I would entertain a motion to approve the budget report. Councillor Skelton Morven and Councillor Cunningham. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Adie is opposed. It's carried. All right. If there's no other business to come before council, before the committee of the whole, rather, I will call for a motion to adjourn and move into a regular council meeting. Councillor Randhawa and Councillor